She mocked his dreams, then watched them come true without her. You're 34 years old, Daniel, and your greatest achievement is still a folder full of drawings no one wants. Vanessa's voice carried farther than she intended, or perhaps exactly as far as she intended. The laughter around the dinner table was soft at first, a few embarrassed breaths, a spoon touching porcelain. Then her brother leaned back in his chair and smiled into his wine glass, giving everyone permission to enjoy the joke. Daniel sat beneath the chandelier with one hand resting beside an untouched plate of roasted lamb. His charcoal gray suit was 3 years old. Vanessa had reminded him of that before they left the apartment. Her father's dining room glittered with polished silver, crystal glasses, and the cold blue reflection of the city beyond the windows. 30 floors below, headlights moved through the rain like veins of liquid gold. On the table beside Daniel's elbow lay the folder Vanessa had mentioned. He had brought it because her father had asked what he was working on. Inside were sketches of modular energy systems, compact battery units designed for hospitals, shelters, and remote communities. Daniel had spent 6 years refining them after midnight, using borrowed software on a laptop with a cracked corner. Vanessa's father had barely looked at the first page. A portable power grid, he had asked. A decentralized one, Daniel said. Smaller units can connect to each other. If one fails, the others keep running. Her brother gave a quiet whistle. So, magic batteries. They're not magic. No, Vanessa said, lifting her wine. Magic makes money. The laughter came again. Daniel looked at his wife. She wore the pearl earrings he had bought after saving for 4 months. He remembered the way she had cried when he gave them to her on their 5th anniversary. She had held his face and told him she would rather live in one room with him than in a palace with anyone else. That had been before the promotions she did not receive, before their friends began buying houses, before photographs of exotic vacations appeared every morning on her phone, before love became something she measured against other people's lives. Vanessa turned toward the man seated on her right. Marcus Vale was the youngest senior vice president at her company. His watch cost more than Daniel earned in a year. He had arrived late, apologized without sincerity, and handed Vanessa's mother a bottle of wine from a vineyard his family supposedly owned. Marcus picked up one of Daniel's sketches. Interesting, he said, examining it for less than 3 seconds. But energy is a capital-heavy industry. You need investors, government contacts, manufacturing partners. Not just imagination. I know. And you have those things? Not yet. Marcus placed the sketch back on the table. The gesture was gentle. The contempt was not. Vanessa watched him with open admiration. Then she looked at Daniel, and something in her face hardened. You see, she said, that's the difference between a dream and a plan. Daniel closed the folder. Her father cleared his throat. Her mother stared at the centerpiece. No one defended him. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice only slightly. I am tired of being embarrassed by you. The room went still. Rain whispered against the glass. Daniel's thumb rested on the worn edge of the folder. Vanessa, her mother murmured. No, someone has to say it. Vanessa placed her wineglass down. I work with people who build real companies. People who make decisions. People who don't come home every night talking about what they might become someday. Daniel watched her carefully, not angrily, carefully, as if he were looking at a bridge and hearing the first cable snap. I thought you believed in it, he said. I believed in you, she replied. That was my mistake. Marcus looked away, but not before Daniel saw the satisfaction in his eyes. Vanessa removed her wedding ring. The tiny sound it made when she placed it on the table was quieter than the rain. Yet Daniel heard it more clearly than anything else that evening. I filed the papers this morning, she said. I want a divorce. Her mother gasped. Her father said her name sharply. Daniel did not move. Vanessa waited for him to plead. She expected questions, accusations, perhaps one final desperate promise that everything would change. Instead, he looked at the ring beneath the chandelier. For years, he had believed silence was patience. That night, he finally understood that sometimes silence was the sound a door made when it closed forever. He stood, took his folder, and buttoned his old suit jacket. Marcus gave him a sympathetic smile. You'll be all right, he said. Daniel looked at him. I know. Then he walked out. Vanessa did not follow. 3 weeks later, Daniel signed the divorce papers in a conference room that smelled of coffee and printer ink. Vanessa arrived with a lawyer and a cream-colored coat Marcus had given her. Daniel knew Marcus had given it to her because he had seen them together outside a restaurant 2 nights earlier. They had not noticed him standing across the street beneath a broken awning. Vanessa looked radiant, relieved. She spoke about the apartment, the furniture, and the savings account with the brisk efficiency of someone dividing assets after a failed business arrangement. Daniel asked for almost nothing. He kept his books, his laptop, the drafting table his grandfather had built, and the dented metal box containing the earliest prototype of his battery system. Vanessa studied him as he signed the final page. "You should think about getting a stable job," she said. "Starting over might be good for you." He capped the pen. "I already have a job. At the municipal engineering office. It pays the bills." "It barely did that when there were two of us." Daniel slid the papers toward the lawyer. Vanessa's expression softened, but only with pity. "You're not a bad person," she said. "You're just not the man I thought you would become." For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." She mistook agreement for defeat. By the end of the month, Daniel was living in a studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat. The walls trembled whenever the industrial dryers entered their final cycle. The radiator hissed at random hours. His kitchen consisted of one counter, one burner, and a refrigerator that made a clicking noise before it started. On his first night there, he ate noodles from the pot because he had forgotten to buy plates. The wedding photograph remained wrapped in newspaper inside a moving box. He never unpacked it. At 2 in the morning, he sat on the floor with his laptop balanced on the only chair. Vanessa's words returned whenever the room became quiet. "A folder full of drawings no one wants." He opened the folder. For 6 years, he had worked on the system in fragments. An hour before work, 40 minutes after dinner, Sunday mornings while Vanessa slept. He had postponed meetings because she wanted him home, declined a research position in another state because she had just been promoted, used his savings to help pay for her graduate program instead of building a prototype. He had called those choices love. Perhaps they had been. But love, he realized, was not meant to require the burial of one person so the other could stand taller. Daniel resigned from the municipal engineering office 2 days later. His supervisor stared at him. "You have no investors," the man said. "I have enough for 4 months. You don't have a team. I'll find one. You don't even have a real prototype." Daniel looked through the office window at the gray city skyline. "Then I'll build one." He rented a former repair shop near the freight district. The windows were clouded with dust, and the concrete floor carried black stains left by machines removed years earlier. The first week, he worked alone. He assembled battery cells beneath fluorescent lights that flickered whenever the heater turned on. He slept on a folding cot in the back office and washed his shirts in the sink. His first prototype overheated after 11 minutes. The second failed during a demonstration for a local clinic. The third lasted 3 hours, then shut down with a sound like a gunshot, and filled the workshop with bitter smoke. Daniel stood outside in the freezing dawn while firefighters opened the metal shutters. His hands were black with soot. His bank account held enough money for 18 more days. He almost called Vanessa, not to ask her back, only to hear a familiar voice. He stared at her name on the screen until it blurred. Then he deleted the number. The next morning, he returned to the scorched workbench. He found the failed cell, placed it beneath a magnifying lamp, and began again. A graduate student named Priya Shah joined him after reading one of his technical papers online. She arrived wearing a red scarf and carrying 2 coffees. "I think your thermal system is wrong," she said before introducing herself. Daniel looked at the coffee. "Which one is mine?" "The black one. You can stay." A week later, they hired Luis Ortega, an electrician who had spent 15 years repairing emergency generators in hospitals. Luis had a laugh that filled the empty workshop and a habit of naming every prototype after failed kings. Their 4th system was called Richard. It caught fire. Their 5th was Henry. It survived 40 hours. Their 6th had no name because none of them wanted to tempt fate. It powered a small rural clinic through a winter blackout. Daniel received the call at 3:17 in the morning. A nurse spoke over the sound of wind. "The main grid went down," she said. "Your unit kept the neonatal room running." Daniel sat on the edge of his folding cot. "How many infants?" 7. He closed his eyes. Across the workshop, a green indicator light blinked steadily in the darkness. For the first time since the divorce, Vanessa's voice did not enter his mind. He heard only the nurse crying quietly on the phone. The clinic ordered 2 more units. Then another clinic called. Then a disaster relief organization. Daniel moved from the studio above the laundromat into a slightly larger apartment, but he kept the same drafting table. He replaced the cracked laptop only when it stopped turning on. The company grew from 3 employees to 12, then to 40. Every refusal taught them where the system was weak. Every failure forced Daniel to make it simpler. Competitors dismissed the technology as too small to matter. Traditional energy firms wanted massive projects, political contracts, and visible monuments. Daniel focused on places large companies ignored: clinics, fire stations, schools in remote regions, emergency shelters. He did not build towers. He built things that kept the lights on when towers went dark. 3 years after Vanessa left, a hurricane struck the southern coast and destroyed power lines across 4 counties. Hospitals switched to diesel generators. Fuel trucks could not reach them. Daniel's modular systems were deployed at 6 emergency centers. They ran for 9 days. A reporter photographed him standing in floodwater, carrying a battery unit with Luis. The image appeared in a national newspaper beneath a headline about an unknown engineer changing disaster response. Investors began calling. Daniel rejected the first 7 offers. The 8th came from Eleanor Sterling, a woman in her 60s who had built one of the largest infrastructure funds in the country. She entered the workshop without an entourage and spent an hour speaking to the engineers before asking to meet Daniel. "You don't trust money," she said. "I don't trust what money usually wants. What does yours want?" "Control." "Then don't sell it." Daniel studied her. She smiled. "Let me buy 30%. You keep the company. I help you build factories." He accepted 2 weeks later. The company became Sterling Grid. Daniel insisted that Priya and Luis receive equity. He hired people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or told they were too inexperienced to matter. In the new headquarters, no executive office was built larger than the engineering lab. When magazines asked to photograph him, Daniel usually sent the team instead. The press called him private, then elusive. Finally, the invisible founder. His face remained absent from most public profiles. His name did not. Sterling Grid expanded into 12 countries. Its systems powered hospitals, airports, schools, and entire rural districts. The technology Vanessa had once called a folder full of drawings became the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar company. Daniel bought a home near the ocean, but there were no gates around it. He bought a new suit, but kept the old one in the back of his closet. Not as a reminder of humiliation, as proof that the man who wore it had survived. While Daniel's world widened, Vanessa's began to narrow. At first, her life with Marcus looked exactly as she had imagined. Rooftop restaurants, weekend flights, photographs, taken from hotel balconies. He introduced her to executives who never asked what anything cost. He bought her a diamond bracelet 6 months after the divorce and told her she deserved to be with a man who understood ambition. Vanessa believed him. She moved into his penthouse and learned which wines to order, which charities to support, and which smiles meant nothing. But Marcus loved admiration more than he loved her. When his promotion was delayed, he blamed his colleagues. When investments failed, he blamed the market. When Vanessa questioned him, he blamed her tone. The expensive dinners became business obligations. The vacations disappeared. His phone remained face down on every table. One evening, she found messages from a younger consultant. Marcus did not apologize. "You knew who I was," he said. Vanessa stood in the kitchen beneath lights, too white to be warm. "No," she whispered. "I thought I did." He laughed. The sound struck her with the force of recognition. She moved out the next day. By then, her father had suffered a stroke, her mother had sold the family apartment, and her brother had disappeared into debt after a failed real estate venture. Vanessa poured herself into work. For a time, work rewarded her. She became director of strategic partnerships at North Star Energy, an old corporation built on gas, steel, and political influence. Her office occupied the 26th floor. Her name appeared on a glass door. She told herself this was what she had wanted. Then the market changed. Cities began replacing traditional emergency grids with modular systems. Hospitals wanted cleaner backup power. Governments stopped renewing contracts with companies that could not modernize. North Star lost 3 major clients in 6 months. Its stock fell. Rumors of layoffs moved through the corridors. At every emergency meeting, one competitor's name appeared on the screens. Sterling Grid. Vanessa knew the company. Everyone did. She had seen photographs of relief centers lit by its systems after earthquakes and storms. She had read about its anonymous founder, a former municipal engineer who had refused to sell his patents. She never read closely enough to learn his full name. The articles usually called him D. Mercer. Daniel had always hated his middle name, and in the early years, Vanessa had known him only as Daniel Reed. After the divorce, he had restored his mother's family name, Mercer. The name meant nothing to Vanessa. Not yet. Northstar's board spent months seeking a buyer. Most companies refused. The factories were outdated. The debt was enormous. The brand had become a monument to yesterday. Only Sterling Grid expressed interest. Its proposal could save thousands of jobs, preserve 2 manufacturing plants, and restructure Northstar's failing technology division. The acquisition would also place every senior executive under review. Vanessa worked for 6 weeks preparing the presentation that might preserve her position. The signing gala was held at the Halcyon Hotel beneath a ceiling painted with silver clouds. Vanessa arrived in a black evening gown and the pearl earrings Daniel had once given her. She had not worn them in years. She told herself she chose them because they were elegant. She did not examine the lie too closely. The ballroom filled with investors, government officials, journalists, and employees desperate to appear calm. At the far end of the room, a stage stood beneath a screen bearing both company logos. Northstar Energy, Sterling Grid. Vanessa held a glass of champagne she did not drink. "Have you met the founder?" a colleague asked. "Not yet. I heard he arrived through the private entrance." "Of course he did. They say he might announce a new leadership team tonight." Vanessa adjusted her earrings. "I'm sure he'll recognize experience." The colleague nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the exits. Everyone at Northstar had begun speaking as if they were already unemployed. At 9 o'clock, the ballroom doors opened. A man entered alone. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie. He paused beneath the gold light while an event coordinator hurried toward him. Vanessa saw only his profile at first, the straight line of his shoulders, the calm way he listened, the familiar habit of touching the cuff of his left sleeve. Her breath caught. Daniel turned. For several seconds, the ballroom vanished. Vanessa saw the man from her father's dining room. The old suit, the worn folder, the ring beneath the chandelier. But the man walking toward her no longer carried the slight inward curve of someone apologizing for taking up space. His hair was touched with gray at the temples. His face was leaner. His gaze was steady. He looked neither rich nor poor. He looked free. Vanessa stepped into his path. "Daniel." He stopped. "Hello, Vanessa." His voice had not changed. That unsettled her more than anything. She looked at the people moving around him, the hotel manager, the event director, 2 Northstar board members. Her mind rejected what her eyes were seeing. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." She gave a brittle laugh. "I can see that." A few nearby guests glanced at them. Vanessa lowered her voice. "Are you working for Sterling?" Daniel looked toward the stage. In a way, she studied his suit, his watch, the quiet attention surrounding him. Pride, wounded and automatic, rose before reason could stop it. "Well," she said, "I'm glad someone finally found a use for your little battery project." Daniel's expression remained still. The event director looked at Vanessa in alarm. She did not notice. "I suppose this must be exciting for you," she continued. "Being in a room like this." A man standing behind her coughed into his hand. Daniel adjusted his cuff. The same motion she remembered from years ago, only now it did not signal discomfort. It signaled an ending. "I hope your presentation goes well," he said. Vanessa blinked. "You know about my presentation?" Before he could answer, music faded across the ballroom. The chairman of Northstar stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" Conversations softened. Lights dimmed. A white spotlight moved across the room. Vanessa turned toward the stage, relieved to escape Daniel's unreadable gaze. The chairman spoke about transition, innovation, and the responsibility to protect Northstar's employees. He thanked the advisors and legal teams who had completed the acquisition. Then he smiled toward the audience. "Tonight, we are honored to welcome the man whose vision made this partnership possible." The spotlight shifted. It crossed the marble floor, passed over Vanessa, stopped on Daniel. The room erupted in applause. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her glass. "Please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Sterling Grid," the chairman announced, Mr. Daniel Mercer. For one terrible second, Vanessa heard nothing. Not the applause. Not the music. Not the chairman repeating Daniel's name. She watched the man she had once called an embarrassment walk past her toward the stage. Every person in the ballroom stood. Investors reached for his hand. Board members straightened their jackets. Journalists lifted cameras. On the enormous screen behind the podium appeared a photograph of Daniel in a flooded hospital corridor, carrying one end of a power unit while doctors ran behind him. Beneath it were the words, "Energy that remains when everything else fails." Daniel reached the stage. He shook the chairman's hand and faced the room. His gaze moved across hundreds of faces. When it passed over Vanessa, it did not pause. North Star was built by people who believed infrastructure should outlast uncertainty. He began. That belief still matters. His voice was calm. He spoke about factories, workers, and the towns that depended on them. He announced that no manufacturing employees would lose their positions during the first phase of restructuring. Applause rolled through the ballroom. Vanessa remained standing because everyone else was standing. The champagne glass trembled between her fingers. Daniel described a new research facility that would be built inside one of North Star's oldest plants. He named Priya Shah as Chief Technology Officer and Luis Ortega as Director of Emergency Systems. The people who had believed in him would lead the future. Vanessa looked at his face on the screen. She remembered the night he had shown her an early design. They had been sitting on the floor of their first apartment, eating takeout from paper cartons because they could not afford a dining table. "If this works," he had said, "a hospital could keep operating even when the whole city goes dark." She had kissed his cheek. It will work. When had she stopped believing that? When had belief become embarrassing? The answer came quietly. She had stopped when his dream failed to make her look successful. After the speech, Daniel was surrounded. Vanessa watched from the edge of the room as ministers, executives, and journalists waited for his attention. He listened to each person without impatience. He thanked hotel workers who approached him. He introduced Priya to an investor as the engineer who saved the system when I nearly destroyed it. No one around him seemed afraid. No one seemed small. Marcus appeared near the bar shortly before 10. He looked older, though only 7 years had passed. His company had become a minor consulting firm after an investigation forced him from North Star. He followed Vanessa's gaze toward Daniel. "So the stories are true," Marcus said. "You knew?" "I heard rumors. You never told me." Marcus shrugged. "Why would I?" She turned toward him. The indifference on his face was familiar. For years, she had blamed Marcus for showing her a shinier life. But he had not forced her to mock Daniel. He had not removed her wedding ring. He had not placed contempt where love should have been. That choice had been hers. Marcus raised his drink toward the stage. "You chose the wrong horse," he said. Vanessa looked at him. "No," she replied. "I treated a good man like a losing bet." She left him standing there. Near midnight, she found Daniel on a quiet balcony above the river. The gala continued behind the glass doors. Music floated through them in softened notes. Daniel stood with both hands resting on the stone railing. Across the water, the city shone beneath a clear sky. Vanessa approached slowly. "I remember your first design," she said. He did not turn. "The one with the blue casing. That one was terrible." She almost smiled. "You kept it under our bed." The apartment was small. The apartment was happy. Daniel looked at her then. There was no cruelty in his face. That made the regret sharper. "I'm sorry," she said. The words sounded fragile after 7 years of silence. He waited. Vanessa clasped her hands. "I could tell you I was under pressure. That I was afraid. That everyone around me seemed to be moving forward while we were standing still." Daniel said nothing. "But those would only be explanations," she continued. "Not excuses." Music swelled behind the glass. She looked toward the ballroom, where his name still filled the screen. "I humiliated you because I wanted people to think I was better than the life we had. I made your patience look like weakness. I made your dreams sound foolish because I was too impatient to understand it." Her voice broke. "I thought success would prove I had made the right choice." Daniel's eyes remained on her. "And did it?" "No." The answer left her like a breath she had been holding for years. "I watched you tonight," she said. "The way they respect you. The way your team looks at you. You became everything I said you never could." Daniel looked back at the river. "No," she frowned. "I became what I was trying to become before you said it." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I know I don't deserve anything from you." "Then don't ask." She flinched. He was not angry. Anger might have given her something to fight. His peace left no opening. I don't want your money, she said quickly. Or your position. I don't even know what I want. Daniel studied the lights on the water. You want the past to become different because the present is painful. A tear slipped down Vanessa's cheek. Did you ever hate me? For a while. And now? Now I understand you. Hope flickered before she could stop it. Daniel saw it. Understanding softened his face, but not his decision. Understanding isn't the same as returning. The hope disappeared. Vanessa nodded. I thought you had no future, she whispered. Daniel turned fully toward her. You didn't leave because I had no future, he said. You left because you couldn't respect a future you couldn't already see. She closed her eyes. The sentence held no revenge, only truth. And truth was heavier. I did love you, she said. I know. Was it not enough? It was love when life was easy to imagine. Daniel's voice remained gentle. But when belief became inconvenient, you chose contempt. Vanessa covered her mouth with one hand. Behind them, applause rose from the ballroom as another announcement was made. Daniel stepped toward the doors. She called his name. He paused. Are you happy? She asked. He considered the question. Not because he did not know the answer. Because he wanted to give her an honest one. Yes. Is there someone else? Daniel glanced through the glass. Near the stage, Priya was laughing with Eleanor Sterling. Luis stood beside his wife and two daughters. A woman in a navy dress waited near the doors, holding Daniel's coat. She was Dr. Maya Bennett, director of a children's hospital network, and the woman Daniel had met during a storm response project 2 years earlier. She had known him first as an engineer kneeling on a hospital floor, his sleeves rolled up, trying to restore power to an operating room. She had not known the value of his company. She had known the value of his presence. Daniel looked back at Vanessa. There is. Vanessa followed his gaze. Maya saw them and did not interrupt. She simply waited. Confident. Unthreatened. The way people waited when love was not built on fear. Vanessa touched one of the pearl earrings. I wore these tonight, she said. I don't know why. Daniel looked at them. I bought them from a small shop near the train station. I remember. I missed rent by 3 days. Her lips trembled. I never knew that. There were many things you never knew. Daniel opened the balcony door. Warm light spilled over the stone floor. Vanessa stood alone beneath the night sky. Daniel. He turned once more. I really am sorry. This time he smiled. Not the smile of a man receiving what he had waited years to hear. The smile of someone who no longer needed to hear it. I hope one day, he said, you forgive the person you became. Then he walked inside. Maya handed him his coat. She asked no questions. Daniel placed one hand at the small of her back, and together they crossed the ballroom. People stepped aside as they passed, but Daniel barely noticed. At the entrance, a hotel employee struggled with a broken luggage cart. Daniel stopped, helped lift one wheel into place, and thanked the young man when it was done. Vanessa watched from behind the glass. That was when she understood the final cruelty of her mistake. Success had not transformed Daniel into a worthy man. He had always been one. The money had only made it impossible for the world to ignore. Outside, rain had begun to fall. A black car waited at the curb, but Daniel did not enter immediately. He stood beneath the hotel awning and looked across the wet street. Years earlier, he had watched Vanessa leave a restaurant with Marcus from beneath another broken awning. That night, the city had seemed enormous and merciless. Now the same city reflected in the pavement like scattered stars. Maya slipped her hand into his. Ready? She asked. Daniel looked at her. Then back at the hotel where the old life waited behind glass, dressed in pearls and regret. He felt no triumph, no hunger to return and make Vanessa suffer. The dream had never been about proving her wrong. It had been about keeping hospitals alive in the dark. It had been about 3 people in a ruined workshop refusing to quit. It had been about 7 newborns breathing through a winter blackout. It had been about choosing himself after years of asking permission to exist. Daniel opened the car door for Maya. Before entering, he removed something small from his coat pocket. The wedding ring Vanessa had left beneath the chandelier. He had carried it for years, first from grief, then from habit. He held it beneath the rain. The gold no longer looked like a promise, only a circle that had already ended. Daniel placed it in a nearby charity collection box outside the hotel. Then he stepped into the car. As they pulled away, Vanessa remained on the balcony above, watching the red taillights disappear into the rain. She had once mocked his dreams because they had not come true quickly enough for her. Now those dreams illuminated cities, protected lives, and carried him toward a future in which she had no place. Daniel did not become successful to win her back. He became successful when he finally stopped needing her to believe he could. The following Monday, every major business publication carried the same photograph. Daniel Mercer stood beside the newly unveiled Sterling Grid Innovation Center, surrounded not by celebrities or politicians, but by engineers in worn work boots, technicians with grease-stained hands, and young interns whose excitement was impossible to hide. The headline was simple: the CEO who built a billion-dollar company by refusing to forget why he started. Vanessa stared at the newspaper in the cafe before folding it quietly. The woman behind the counter smiled. They say he's donating half the new facility to medical research. Vanessa nodded without speaking. Every article she read seemed to reveal another version of Daniel she had never truly known. The scholarship program for engineering students from low-income families. The emergency energy units sent free of charge after earthquakes overseas. The policy that guaranteed every Sterling employee profit sharing after 5 years. None of those decisions surprised the people who worked with him, only the people who had underestimated him. Inside Sterling Grid headquarters, Daniel's office overlooked the manufacturing floor rather than the city skyline. Visitors often expected marble walls and expensive artwork. Instead, they found whiteboards covered with equations, prototype batteries scattered across tables, and a coffee mug that Priya insisted had survived every major product launch. Luis walked into the office carrying a tablet. The hospital network in Chile wants another shipment. Daniel nodded. Approve it. They're asking for a discount. Give them one. Luis laughed. You know finance hates when you answer before hearing the numbers. Daniel smiled. I already know the numbers that matter. Luis had worked beside him long enough to understand. Profit kept a company alive. Purpose gave it a reason to exist. Several weeks later, Maya found Daniel standing alone in one of the testing facilities after sunset. Rows of battery modules glowed with tiny green lights. He was holding the original prototype. Its casing remained scratched from the fire years earlier. You still keep that? Maya asked. I remind new engineers that success doesn't begin polished. She touched the burned corner. It looks fragile. It was. And now, Daniel looked around the enormous laboratory. It reminds me that fragile things can survive if someone refuses to quit. Maya slipped her hand into his. You know, people think you build all of this because you wanted to prove someone wrong. Daniel chuckled softly. For a while, maybe. And now I wake up thinking about hospitals that shouldn't lose power. She smiled. That's why they'll never catch you. Across town, Northstar's transition into Sterling Grid continued. Many executives resigned voluntarily. Some resisted every change. Vanessa remained. Not because she expected another chance with Daniel. That hope had quietly disappeared. She stayed because leaving would have been another escape. For the first time in years, she wanted to earn something instead of inheriting it. Her new role was considerably smaller than before. No private office. No executive assistant. She managed community energy partnerships in rural districts. The work required visiting schools, clinics, and towns she had once ignored. One rainy afternoon, she met an elderly doctor in a mountain village. The woman pointed proudly toward a compact Sterling battery system humming behind the clinic. When the storm destroyed the main lines last winter, the doctor said, this machine kept our operating room alive. Vanessa walked closer. On the side of the unit was a small engraved plaque, designed to protect life when everything else fails. Below it was Daniel's signature. Not printed. Engraved. She reached out, but stopped before touching it. The doctor noticed. You know Mr. Mercer? Vanessa answered after a long silence. I used to. The doctor smiled warmly. He's visited us 3 times. Vanessa looked surprised. He never told the press. The doctor laughed. He asked us not to. Of course he had. Months passed. Sterling Grid hosted its annual innovation conference. Thousands attended. At the closing ceremony, Daniel surprised everyone by inviting every maintenance worker, technician, cleaner, and security guard onto the stage before the executives. The audience rose to their feet. A reporter later asked why. Daniel answered without hesitation. A company isn't built by the people who receive applause. He Look toward the employees gathered behind him. It's built by the people who show up before the lights come on. The clip spread across social media within hours. Millions watched it. Many admired the billionaire CEO. His employees simply recognized the man they worked for every day. That evening, Daniel and Maya drove along the coast with the windows down. The ocean reflected the last light of sunset. Maya rested her head against the seat. Do you ever think about the life you almost had? Daniel watched the waves. I think about it differently now. How? I used to believe losing Vanessa was the worst thing that ever happened. And now, it forced me to stop asking other people to decide who I was. The car continued along the shoreline. The skies slowly darkened into deep blue. Far behind them, another city prepared for another night. Hospitals switched to emergency backups. Families turned on lights. Children slept safely through storms they would never remember. Most of them would never know Daniel Mercer. They would never know about the folder of sketches everyone laughed at, or the apartment above the laundromat, or the prototypes that burst into flames. They would never know about the wedding ring left on a polished dining table years before. They only knew that when darkness arrived, the light stayed on. Daniel smiled to himself. Some dreams did not need applause. The brightest ones quietly became part of the world. And the people who once mocked them eventually discovered the hardest truth of all. The greatest revenge had never been becoming richer than those who doubted him. It was becoming the man he had always hoped to be, with or without their belief. Years later, business schools would analyze Sterling Grid's rise. They would publish case studies about Daniel Mercer, his patience, his leadership, his refusal to sacrifice long-term purpose for short-term profit. Students would underline his quotes. Executives would repeat his strategies. Investors would admire the billions. Very few would ever ask the question that mattered most. How close had the company come to never existing? The answer lived inside a dusty storage room beneath Sterling Grid's headquarters. One rainy afternoon, a young engineering intern named Ethan was helping organize old prototypes when he noticed a scorched aluminum box sitting on the highest shelf. He carried it downstairs. Mr. Mercer? Daniel looked up from a blueprint. Yes, I found this. Daniel's eyes softened immediately. The box contained Prototype 1. Its wiring was melted, its casing permanently blackened. Beside it lay the original notebook with hundreds of handwritten calculations. Coffee stains covered several pages. Corners had been repaired with tape. Ethan flipped through it carefully. You kept all of this? Daniel nodded. It reminds me where certainty really comes from. You always believed it would work? Daniel smiled. No. Ethan frowned. But everyone says you never gave up. I didn't. Isn't that the same thing? Daniel closed the notebook. No. He looked toward the laboratory where dozens of engineers were testing technology far beyond anything he had once imagined. Belief comes and goes. He tapped the notebook gently. Discipline stays. That conversation spread quietly throughout Sterling Grid. Not because someone ordered it to, because people repeated it. Within weeks, someone painted the sentence on one wall inside the research center. Belief comes and goes. Discipline stays. Visitors assumed it was a motivational slogan. Only Daniel knew it had been written for the younger version of himself who had once sat alone in a freezing workshop wondering whether to quit. Vanessa's own life changed more slowly. There were no dramatic miracles. No billionaire appeared. No sudden fortune arrived. Instead, there were ordinary mornings. Ordinary work. Ordinary humility. She apologized to people she had once ignored. She listened more than she spoke. She stopped measuring every room by who held the most power. One afternoon, she visited her father. Age had softened him. The man who once measured worth by salary now spent his afternoons feeding birds in a small public park. He folded his newspaper. They're naming the new engineering scholarship after Daniel Mercer. Vanessa nodded quietly. I know. Her father remained silent for a long time. I was unfair to him. So was I. I judged him before he had anything. Vanessa looked toward the children running across the grass. No. Her voice was almost a whisper. We judged him before we knew who he already was. Several months later, Sterling Grid announced the opening of a free innovation academy for public school students. Daniel insisted the ceremony remain simple. No fireworks. No celebrity hosts. Only students. A little girl approached the microphone during the event. She couldn't have been older than 11. My dad says Mr. Mercer invented the batteries that kept Grandma's hospital running. Daniel smiled. The girl continued. When I grow up, I want to invent something too. What will you build? Daniel asked. She thought seriously. I don't know yet. He nodded. That's all right. She tilted her head. It is. The important part isn't knowing what you'll build. What is it? Daniel looked across hundreds of young faces. It's becoming the kind of person who won't stop building. The audience applauded. The girl grinned. She would remember that sentence for years. Daniel probably wouldn't. Kindness rarely remembers itself. That evening, Maya found Daniel sitting on the roof of their home, overlooking the ocean. The wind carried the scent of salt through the air. She handed him 2 mugs of tea. You've been quiet. I've been thinking. About work? He shook his head. About forgiveness. She waited. I used to think forgiving Vanessa meant pretending none of it happened. And now, I think forgiveness is accepting that someone else's failure to believe in you doesn't have to become your own. Maya leaned against him. You've forgiven yourself too. Daniel looked toward the horizon. That took longer. Across the city, Vanessa received an unexpected envelope. There was no return address. Inside was a single invitation. Sterling Foundation Community Leadership Dinner. She assumed it had been sent by mistake. When she arrived, a coordinator welcomed her warmly. Mr. Mercer requested your attendance. Vanessa's heart skipped. She almost left. Instead, she walked inside. The event wasn't glamorous. Teachers, volunteer doctors, engineers, firefighters, people whose work rarely appeared in newspapers. Daniel greeted every guest personally. When he reached Vanessa, he smiled politely. Thank you for coming. She looked around. I don't understand. You've spent the last 3 years rebuilding emergency partnerships in rural communities. She blinked. You know about that? I received the reports. I thought. You thought I never noticed. He nodded toward the room. People who quietly improve other people's lives deserve to be here. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your kindness. Daniel answered gently. This isn't kindness. What is it? It's fairness. For years, she had expected revenge. Instead, she found dignity. And somehow, that hurt even more. When the dinner ended, Vanessa walked outside beneath a clear autumn sky. She didn't call Daniel back. She didn't ask for another chance. Some endings were too honest to rewrite. She simply whispered the words she wished she had understood years earlier. I'm proud of you. Daniel never heard them. He didn't need to. 5 years later, Sterling Grid became the world's leading emergency energy company. Its systems operated in more than 60 countries. Millions of people depended on technology that had once existed only inside a worn folder everyone laughed at. The original sketches were placed behind glass in the company museum. Visitors often stared at the rough pencil lines. Children usually asked the same question. Why didn't anyone believe him? The tour guides always smiled. Because every extraordinary future looks ordinary before it happens. On the 20th anniversary of Sterling Grid, Daniel stood once again beneath a chandelier. Not in his former in-law's dining room. In a grand hall filled with thousands of employees. The applause lasted nearly 3 minutes. When it finally faded, Daniel stepped toward the microphone. He looked around the room. I've been called successful many times. A quiet laugh spread through the audience. But success isn't a destination. He paused. It's the freedom to become yourself without asking permission. Silence settled over the hall. I hope every person here builds something. People expected him to say companies or fortunes. Instead, he smiled. A family, a friendship, a community, a dream. It doesn't matter. What matters? His voice became softer. Is that no one else's doubt convinces you to abandon it. The audience stood again, not because of the billionaire, but because of the man. Late that night, after the celebration ended, Daniel returned to the engineering museum alone. The building was silent. He stopped in front of the display containing the burned notebook and the very first prototype. Beside them was a small bronze plaque. It didn't mention billions of dollars. It didn't mention awards. It didn't mention acquisitions. It simply read, every great future begins as something small that refuses to disappear. Daniel smiled. He switched off the lights. Outside, thousands of homes glowed across the city. Somewhere, hospitals continued saving lives. Children slept peacefully. Storms came and went. The lights stayed on. And somewhere else, another young dreamer was probably being told that their idea was impossible. Daniel hoped they would keep going anyway. Because dreams do not need everyone's belief. They only need one person brave enough to protect them until the rest of the world finally understands.